Richard Stedall, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Welcome to Campus Brunch on Campus FM 103.7. So, Richard, Paul has introduced you. You've probably picked up a little Maltese now because you've been in Malta how long?
About 3.5 years now.
3.5 years. But your connection with Malta goes back much longer, much further.
Yes, I first came here around about Easter 1987, just before my 15th birthday on a short family holiday. Sadly, at the time, although I've been interested in buses ever since I was young, I'm reliably informed by my mother that one of my very first words was bus. It's the hobby's been with me that long. But when I came in 1987, I'm afraid I was not the slightest bit interested in all the lovely old buses that were running around. What I was interested in was the recently imported buses from the UK that had just started to arrive in the mid-80s.
What we'd call the London buses, Paul, remember?
Yes. That's just it. So I was kind of sort of interested in those. I didn't have a camera at the time, so my late father took a couple of photographs for me.
Would they have been the duple dominance and those kind of ones? That seemed a bit like coaches.
Yeah.
But there were also those ones that ended up with the Ministry of Education, Paul, remember? They were slightly different.
Yeah, they were the ones that were genuinely ex-London. Although pretty much everything that arrived in the 80s were referred to as London buses. It's a bit like you go to America and if you see a red double-decker bus, everybody says, oh, it must be a London bus. No. The vast majority of them have nothing to do with London. It's just that they've been painted red so that people think that they're London ones.
So, Richard, at 15, you were already interested in buses. You've always been a bus, like some kids are into trains and they're train spotters or aeroplanes. You were a bus freak. But when you arrived in Malta, you weren't so interested in the old buses, but what was for Malta new, but they were actually second-hand British buses.
Yeah, back then. When I came again in 1992, when I was 20, I'd started work, I needed a holiday, and I thought, right, where shall I go? Let's go and spend, I think this time it was about 10 days, 2 weeks. And that time I then started to take a bit more interest, being just that little bit older and things, you start to sort of take a bit more interest in what are these, unique to Malta, strange old buses. A number of which, they'd say Leyland on them or they'd say AEC. So you think, well, there's obviously, or Bedford, there's a connection to the UK there somewhere. And,
but you would never have seen something like that in the UK.
No,
not exactly
nothing.
The same.
No, because all the genuine Maltese buses had bodies built by Maltese craftsmen here. They looked unique. They, to a certain extent, sounded unique and things.
Except for the occasional maybe light cluster, which you'd say came from, that came from this truck or this British car, probably.
That's just it. British cars and especially American cars as well. The backs of a lot of these buses were designed to resemble, albeit scaled up slightly, the back ends of some sort of classic 50s and 60s American
those
cars.
huge American cars, the fins.
Yeah, the Impala back ends and that sort of thing. So you will notice the fact that some of the back ends of the buses are kind of Impala shaped.
Yes, with the sort of teardrop shaped red clusters at the back. Of course.
Yeah.
So kind of like movies like the old Alfred Hitchcock movies, North by Northwest and stuff. Those huge American cars. The backs of Maltese buses, of course.
Yeah. But it to a certain extent, the look of the whole bus depended to a certain extent on what the owner wanted when it was built, but also what was kind of sort of in fashion and the bodybuilder, what his particular interest was at the time. So you'll see that by kind of sort of looking at the back ends and the sides and the fronts of the buses and things, you can also sometimes tell who it was who built the bus because they had a particular quirk, as it were, that little feature there was something that only they did.
Well, I'm sure we're going to go into this in the future because you have so much information. But you're 20 years old, you're in Malta in 1992 and starting to take an interest in the Maltese bodied buses. So what then?
I then came back on a regular basis more and more frequently. In fact, from 2001 onwards, I came at least once a year.
Oh, wow.
For at least a week. From about 2006, I was made aware that there were these old paper files with information dating back possibly as early as the 30s that had originally been with the traffic division of the police and are now with what these days is Transport Malta, but at the time was ADT. So I wrote into the licensing office management and said, can I come in and maybe look to see if I can get access to some of these files.
Well, but why would you want to do that?
Because so little is known about these buses.
And was this like your job in the UK, or
no,
was this totally a hobby?
It was purely a hobby. Up until I moved out here 3.5 years ago, my job was working for the UK Met Office, the weather people. I was on the commercial side of the business, so I dealt with customers who needed special forecasts during the winter to know when to go and put salt and grit down to stop ice and snow forming in car parks and on footpaths and
to cause rust in the old cars.
The sorts of problems you just don't get here in Malta. So it was all very much a hobby. But in 2006, I went along to ADT, talked to one of their senior managers, and explained, look, this is why I want this information. This is the sort of information I want. And I said at the time, look, I have no interest in any personal information. So, all I was interested in was, what make is the vehicle? When was it new? If the chassis was second hand, where would that come from? What were the seating? What was the engine? When was it withdrawn?
And this sort of information would have been interesting for your mates back in the UK as well, perhaps, who are into buses.
Yes, there's a
club
huge,
or something.
There's a number of clubs and associations in the UK, some of which go back decades. Some are look at things from a national perspective. Some it's kind of sort of county or fleet orientated. I'm also involved with an organisation called Buses Worldwide, who look at things obviously internationally.
Yes.
But there's a lot of people who, primarily through holidays to Malta and things like that, people in the UK and further afield who fell in love with Malta's buses. There had been over the years a little bit of research. In the late 70s, there was a guy called Mike Fenton who came here, spent a lot of time talking to the drivers and the owners, literally crawling under vehicles to try and sort of tell from under the chassis frames underneath roughly what make they were. And he was the first one to really sort of properly put together the first attempt at a fleet list of what was here at the time. And that was published around about 1980 by an organisation called the PSV Circle. What I wanted to do was kind of sort of take the work that he and several others had done since and to really try and expand it. And what I have done ever since, initially a week or two a year just whilst I was on holiday, and for the last 3.5 years as part of my job running the Malta Bus Archive, is to literally for every single bus, coach, minibus, former British military buses, buses that have been converted over the years into trucks and vans, airport buses, anything like that. I'm trying to build up a profile for each vehicle. And on the whole, I've now got, let's say, probably about 90% of the vehicles done. Certainly from 1930s onwards.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Earlier stuff, the records just aren't really there at the moment.
But Richard, so someone like you and your friends that you mentioned in the UK who are into this and in all these clubs, the Maltese buses, they're so unique. I mean, for example, Cyprus or Gibraltar or other British colonies, parts of the British Empire, where buses were introduced at the same time as Malta. Did they not develop in the same kind of way to be so fascinating?
Yes and no. There is an interest in Cypriot buses, not as much as Malta, but there certainly is an interest in Cypriot buses. But further afield, I think the thing is, until recently, travel has obviously been limited. There's only so far you could go on a cheap package holiday and things. So Malta, Cyprus, Gibraltar, not certain so much of an extent because being such a small territory, there wasn't the variety.
Yes.
But what here and on Cyprus, because most of the bodies were locally built, there was a lot of individuality, and it was that individuality that I think generated the interest.
So you don't get like Jamaica, for example. You don't get a similar kind of thing happening. And
there would have been, but the problem was the fact that nobody from the UK, or very, very rarely would anybody from the UK go on holiday or have travelled to Cyprus. I'm lucky to have been about 9 years ago to Fiji and Samoa in the South Pacific.
Ooh, lovely.
Fiji really reminded me a lot about Malta, in as much that you had British-built chassis, locally built bodies, originally wooden, now metal-framed, and that sort of thing. Islands, although most people, when they think of the Fijian Islands, they think they're maybe roughly the same sort of size as Malta. They're not. Just because on a map of the Pacific they appear as little pinpricks.
Little dots, sort of yes.
You're looking at the main island on Fiji is probably 150, 200 kilometres long and roughly 100 kilometres north to south.
Much bigger than Malta.
Much bigger than Malta. But most of the interior is mountainous. So most of the villages and the habitations actually around the outsides of those islands. But again, somewhere like there, if people had been able to get there easily, then there would have been. Now I've
international interest from where these clubs originate from, which is mostly UK, etc. I see what you mean.
I know people in Australia and New Zealand who, from the 70s onwards, started to visit places like Fiji, and therefore were taking photographs and making notes and
creating this sort of cult of the Fijian bus.
That's
as there is the Maltese bus.
And in fact, start of last year, just before COVID hit and that sort of thing, there was a guy I know in Fiji who was over with his boss, who's the Speaker of the House of Parliament out there. They were over for some Commonwealth small islands meeting here in Malta. I was talking to this friend of mine, and he would love to try and set up a Fiji Bus Archive project along the lines of what I've been doing here in Malta.
Yes.
But again, obviously, COVID then hit, and they've been under lockdown and bits and pieces as well. So at the moment, that project's not gone anywhere. But I've said that if I can help, I will do, because it would be an interesting thing to do.
So next we'll talk about the Malta Bus Archive and the fact that you moved here and you're working with the archives, the National Archives of Malta. So we'll talk about that in detail. But I'll play some music. But before I do that, I just wanted to ask Paul.
Yes.
Paul, how did you and Richard Stedall meet? And how did your relationship start? Because it's thanks to you that...
the National Archives.
At the National Archives, okay.
The National Archives. I have been in very good relationship with the National Archives for 1,001 reasons.
Especially because of your research.
I'll stick about the research of the Malta
Railway, yes.
and all. I had heard that all the files that the Public Works Department had in Floriana had moved up to the National Archives, where a friend of mine was already the head of the archives, Dr. Charles Farrugia. We had been working on other projects with the Notarial Archives Department, Department of Information, and all. And so obviously, one fine day, there was this guy wearing his hat, because it's only here that we don't see Richard wearing his hat. That's synonymous with him. And I think us people who are involved in transportation are either wearing caps or wearing hats. And eventually I was introduced. And you know me.
Yes, of course.
We either click at the first time we see each other, the first time we meet, or not.
And you immediately clicked.
We immediately clicked because, I mean, the work he was here doing was invaluable. That you can't put a value to it, you know.
Yes.
And he was doing it the right way. I'm sorry to say that there were many other people who wanted to try and do something similar over here in Malta, but unfortunately, many people tend to work on their own. They don't want to pass. Oh, no, because I've researched that, and they don't share it. And when you don't share, that is the biggest mistake you do. This is like having a wonderful collection about, you name it, anything. What's the use of having a nice collection of old photographs? And you keep it
If
there.
nobody ever sees it, yes.
You keep it there at your home.
Yes.
And, you know, sometimes somebody comes along and you show him a couple of photographs and you say, wow!
As a teaser.
And you say, no, you can't copy those. No, I can't give you a copy of that because that's mine. No. Archiving means
and then unfortunately these
distribute.
people pass away, some of them, and then their descendants don't know who the worth and the rarity of what
they end up burnt
or thrown away,
burnt down or thrown away.
Yeah.
Archiving, the best way for archiving is to share.
Yes.
The more copies you have around,
Networking,
the safer
sharing.
you are.
Yes, absolutely.
And I found Richard to be of the same theory.
The same, yes.
So
lovely. Okay, Paul, thank you for that. Richard, stay with us. We're going to go into the Malta Bus Archive now, but first we're going to hear something from Glenn Vella. Richard, we're talking about how the big change from the Maltese buses, the old ones we had, to the new system was international news, wasn't it?
It was, yes. I was here for the end of the old times and the start of Arriva, and certainly that last day on the 2nd of July 2011, there were dozens of us from the UK and even from further afield.
Fans and journalists. And
just here to take photos, to record the end of things and that sort of thing. So yes, there's always been that big interest internationally.
And some ended up in the UK, I believe, right?
Some have been preserved in the UK.
In UK museums and things?
That's just it, or just with private collectors. And things. One ex-London bus has gone to Denmark. There's one Maltese classic bus on the Isle of Man.
I think it turns up in like postcards and things.
Yep, that's just it. And then there's loads, as I say, have gone, well, probably at least a dozen or so have gone back to the UK. Some are classic Maltese buses, some are ex-UK ones that have kind of sort of gone back to the UK.
But it was it sort of a sad feeling for people such as yourself?
It was. What I think really kind of sort of struck me was the Sunday morning, the 3rd of July, when when Arriva started, was just that realisation that from that day onwards, there were not going to be any more traditional Maltese buses on the road. They were just so synonymous with Malta. Internationally, there are even today, 10 years later type thing, there are certain things that if you were to sort of say to people, not just in the UK but elsewhere, name something that is, Maltese, and the Maltese buses will be
in that
somewhere in that
top
sort
5
of,
for sure.
That's the step.
Yes. I mean, Maltese dog, Maltese cat. I don't know
and it's why even today,
Maltesers, they'd probably say the chocolate, even though it's got nothing to do with Malta.
even today, if you look in the souvenir shops, you will still see loads of items with traditional yellow Maltese buses on them. Not that livery, as it was carried then, dated back earlier than 1995. That's when the buses went from being green to yellow. Up until 1973, each group of village routes actually had its own livery, and there were about a dozen of those.
Before my time, but it must have been amazing.
Before
I've seen
my
pictures.
time as well. But we'll talk about that on another occasion.
As time goes by, because this is not the first, the last time you'll be with us, because we're gonna do a whole series like we did on the railway with Paul a few weeks ago and the tramway. And speaking of the international community, we have some international listeners probably at the moment listening in from the United Kingdom at the moment, right? On
hopefully so.
Friends of yours and colleagues.
I made a point of advertising that. I was going to be on your show today on my Facebook group, the Malta Bus Archive Facebook group, and things. And I know that certainly there will be some people back in the UK tuning in, especially as today in the UK is a public holiday.
Of course.
And therefore, people aren't going to be at work, and they're going to be more able to tune in and to listen and things.
And apparently, at least parts of the UK, the weather's quite nice.
Not today.
It was
winter,
yesterday.
It
right?
It was recently, but winter has re-arrived today. It's bitterly cold, especially down the east coast of England today.
But I saw pictures, British friends posting pictures over the weekend. They had some really nice weather in parts of the UK.
That's the stick. It was up to 25 Celsius last week in parts of southeast England and things. But this time of the year, the weather does really flip-flop backwards and forwards, but that's my old industry, as it were.
So hello to any international listeners listening to us at the moment. We're broadcasting from Malta on Campus FM at 103.7 from the University of Malta. Richard Stedall, Malta bus expert. So you came to Malta, you had a chat with the ADT, you started doing research, you'd come and go, and then finally, what happened and what made you stay?
So it was during my December 2016 visit here. I'd had the idea of the Malta Bus Archive. Now, originally the way I saw it was going to be like a virtual archive, and that there would be lots of there's lots of people here in Malta, back in the UK, that have got their own interests and collections of Malta transport items and things. There's one guy I know of that is a collector of tickets, and he's got a website on tickets and Malta bus tickets and that sort of thing. So my intention was the fact that if anybody had inquiries about specific areas, I'd then be able to kind of sort of put them in touch with, you need to speak to so-and-so, or you need to go to, and that sort of thing. But my employer at the time, which was the UK Met Office, I'd been working for them for nearly 27 years, were looking for some volunteers to go on voluntary redundancy. So I kind of thought, when I used to come here and do my research visits, I tended to come the week or two before Christmas. And I always used to joke with my colleagues, well, I'll see you after Christmas. That's if I don't stay out there and get a job. And one of my colleagues said to me, well, if you went on this voluntary redundancy, you could do what you always threaten to do and get a job out there. And I kind of went, ooh. So in December 2016, I actually came here to the university to speak to Professor John Kirkhope, who is probably the island's leading expert on oral history and things.
Of history, yes.
And I kind of sort of just talked through with him. I'd got this idea I wanted to kind of sort of interview some people out here, but I didn't know much about the specifics of how to do it. I also said the fact that really, if you're talking to older generations of people, the interviews really need to be in Maltese. To get that language, those individual terms and phrases that are unique to the bus industry. Every industry has unique phrases and things. But I said, obviously, I don't speak Maltese. And he said, you've probably timed this about right. Because he said that here at the university there'd been the public memory archive that he'd been working on.
Yes.
And then up at the National Archives, they were just starting on the Memorja project, which is oral, sound and visual archive. And that the intention was to merge the two projects together. And they were looking for a couple of new subjects. And John said, he said, buses. He said, yeah, that would be a good one to do. And I said, well, look, maybe I can assist from the UK, give you some people, some names of people to go and talk to, and I can provide a copy of my research and all that sort of thing. And so I then went home, and within a couple of weeks, this thing of the voluntary redundancy came up. So I came back out here and saw John and Dr. Charles Ferrugia, who's in charge at the National Archives and also lectures here at the university. And I basically did a presentation to them about a slightly different Malta Bus Archive project, where I would actually come here and work with them, and we'd make it something a lot more official. We'd make it the official archive of the industry. And my presentation was basically on the line of, get a job. Go on, you want to, get a job. And at the end of the presentation, they basically said, we love it. There's just one small technical issue. Where are we going to find the money to pay for you?
Yeah.
By the end of 2017, that issue had been resolved, and I'm now employed as a contractor, 50% paid for by the Transport and Infrastructure Ministry, 50% paid for by whichever ministry owns the National Archives. And obviously that's changed a couple of times over recent years and things, but it's now the new Heritage Ministry. And I'm employed to be part of the Memorja team at the National Archives, and specifically to work on the Malta Bus Archive project.
Oh, fantastic.
Before I talk to you about the Malta Bus Archive,
yes,
I just very quickly fill you in on, and the listeners in on what Memorja is, because it kind of is integral.
Yes.
Sort of
And in the future we can expand on this, perhaps even with some other guests.
Yep.
Who from this project, because it sounds really interesting.
Yeah. So as I said, it's the Memorja project is a key thing at the National Archives, at the headquarters in Rabat, and it's an oral, sound and visual archive. So recorded interviews are a big thing. Now originally they were just audio. We've now got a video camera, and we're starting to do actual videoed interviews and things. But it also includes things like written accounts, photographs, and other ephemera that tie into certain topics. At the moment, there's probably around about a dozen different topics, some of which include, sort of experiencing war, and especially the Second World War, migration to and from Malta, and especially the link in with the island of Lampedusa, and the fact that there have been, through the fishing trade and that sort of thing, there have been families that have moved backwards and forwards between the islands over the generations, curing the body and sort of folk medicine and that sort of thing. Food culture, so that includes kind of sort of agriculture, plus also from maybe a housewife's point of view, traditional recipes or food preparation or things like that. The fishing industry, and currently COVID-19. What we're desperately trying to do at the moment is encourage people to actually kind of sort of write short diaries about how, living under the restrictions of lockdowns and schools not being in and all that sort of thing, and worrying about infection and that sort of thing. So we're encouraging people to keep and write short diaries and then submit those so that future generations can understand just how much in the last 12 months especially life has changed.
Yes.
And obviously the Malta Bus Archive fits then in, is one of the topics in with that.
Okay.
We've got a new website currently under development, hopefully about another month or two, and that will be launched, and you'll be able to sort of go in and look at all these different topics, listen to some of the interviews. And what we're going to do is start off with a few, and every month or so we'll upload a few more just to sort of keep the interest there and things. But yeah, that's the Memorja project and things.
There is information online about it, I'm sure, right?
There's not as much. As I say, we've got a new specific to Memorja website.
Okay.
It's nearly ready.
All right.
Hopefully, as I say, another month or two, and it will be ready for launch. So
when it is, I'll share it on our Campus Brunch Facebook page.
That would be great.
So our
Thank you.
listeners could go directly to it.
Yeah, that would be good. So, but yes, as I say, the Malta Bus Archive, as it now stands, is an integral part of the Memorja project. So we're looking at certain key aspects of the bus industry. We've talked a little bit about the vehicles and the research I was doing and things, and we're continuing to add information about those. But the vehicles are really only 50% of the story. It's the people that are
of course.
that are at least 50%. So the owners, the drivers, the conductors, the bus builders, the traffic policemen who used to sort of have to try and keep everything under control.
Of course.
The dispatchers, the ticket checkers,
Conductors,
that's
yes,
just it,
yes,
anything like
yes.
that.
And there's all these elements as well. Some of them, like they used to use children as ticket checkers, and sometimes these bus builders would be whole sort of generations of families, right?
Yes.
And even the bus drivers.
Yeah, and that's just it.
The whole inheriting the license kind of thing, right?
That's just it. It used to sort of go from sort of grandfather to father to son type thing, or great uncle and things, or you'd get parents would buy bus licenses for their sons. Sadly, until relatively recently, women don't appear to have really been involved, certainly in the driving side of things. Women have been bus owners since the 20s and 30s. Sometimes because, maybe if their husband was in the military, he was precluded from owning things like a bus.
Okay.
So it would be registered in the wife's name. And things. And so there have been women who have been bus owners from the early days. But actual drivers, you're probably only looking in about the last 20 years. And really, it's only since Arriva and now MPT have been involved that you see more in the way of women drivers out there. So if during these talks you hear me talking constantly about men and things, it's not because there's I'm ignoring
personal.
the women.
No,
it's just that
it's
one of those industries that until now has been. But,
absolutely.
Yep.
But it was unusual to have women delivery drivers or taxi drivers in Malta up till recently, isn't it? So that's a more modern phenomenon, which obviously with the advent of equality and everything. But yes, in the past, it's to be expected that it's mostly going to be a man thing, as most industries were, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Right. Listen, we're coming to the end of the show, unfortunately.
Okay.
So we're going to have to, much against my will, invite you back, Richard. On the contrary, I've been really enjoying this, just as I've always enjoyed my chats with Paul. So, Paul, you will keep coming, though, won't you?
Yes, of course.
On every 2 weeks.
I'll
to
be
the show.
here.
You'll be
because
there as well. Interjecting.
I'll have to say something every now and then.
Yes, absolutely.
That's one. Besides, I need to learn about buses.
Okay. And
I
ask
need to-
questions occasionally.
And this is one of the reasons why
Yes.
sitting behind a microphone, and I'm keeping very quiet to a certain extent, because there's so much to learn. When you listen, you learn a lot. And certain things which maybe I already knew, Richard has given me that assurance and that clarifying any difficulties
Yes.
which I had, which weren't that much clear. Now they're being made clear.
Clear. Absolutely. So, Richard, we have more to talk about. So we've introduced you now, and we've talked about your job as well with the Malta Archives, and amazing work being done there. Also, this Memorja project, very fascinating. You'll keep us updated, about the website and everything.
Yeah.
But next time, in 2 weeks, we'll be able to start the story from around 1905.
Yep. We will literally go back to the beginning, and we'll start to take a look at the very first buses that arrived here in 1904 and 05. Can I just very quickly add that if anybody wants to contact me in the meantime,
Yes.
the Malta Bus Archive email address is maltabusarchive, all as one word, at gmail.com.
maltabusarchive@gmail.com.
Yeah.
Also, you wanted to mention some lectures that are online?
Yes. It's a case of, to be honest, actually, it might be better to wait until next week, because one of them refers to the very early buses. So we'll talk about that next time in 2 weeks' time.
But the Malta Bus Archive has a presence online.
Yeah.
We'll put that on our Campus Brunch Facebook page.
Yeah. All right.
Richard Stedall, thank you very much.
That's all right.
Paul?
One last thing. We will be back here in 15 days' time, right?
Yes.
If the weather is not good, he's the weatherman.
Oh, of course.
So if we have any problem with, if the weather is not nice, we'll just blame him.
We will blame Richard, absolutely.
I thank Richard for giving our slot this particular touch of professionalism as far as Malta buses are concerned.
Yes.
And keep
it's
up.
nice to know that somebody's taking it so seriously. And
There are so many enthusiasts about Malta buses out there.
yes,
Keep tuned.
absolutely.
Keep up being well informed with
Exactly.
Campus Brunch.
And it's all social history, isn't it? The social history of Malta in the 20th century. Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Richard.